Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Changing Hearts and Minds series. I am Ellza Malok, founder of BMG, and I have here Tracy Lande, partner at Catalyst & Co. Hi, Tracy.
Hey, Elza.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good. So I'm excited to talk about this topic, and I know that you have a lot of questions. Do you want to take it off?
Yeah. So we've been talking about this idea, this ambiguous, that where is the future of work for quite some time. And it's felt like kind of like boiling the ocean. And yesterday we had a really good conversation around like, what does that actually mean? And we talked about how, like, if you asked a leader, what's the future of work? The chances are they're going to have an answer. And just like if you ask them what strategy is, they're going to have an answer, and everyone's going to be different. But it's kind of like the current, it's by design. The current will have you thinking that the future is, in far away, and that there's plenty of time to think about these things. But to our point yesterday, which was, how do we build resilient businesses or resilient organization? That doesn't really jive, just kind of being reactive to what's happening out in the market. It really actually makes you more in a more vulnerable and fragile position, and increasing your overall risk. So we started to talk about, what does an informed and competent path forward look like for the future of work? And right away you were like, look, it's you, first of all, you have to really get clear about where have we come from, like where has work been in the past, and where is work currently, and where will work be moving forward, and really just start there, because there's other conversations about what is work and what is the future of work going to look like. And so to bring it back to sort of the question that a lot of companies have right now is where are we going to be? So I don't mean to oversimplify it, because we've all been here the last 4 years, and we saw early on how some companies came right out of the gate and said we're going to be remote first. And then other market leaders came out a bit later and said, no, we're the new way of you're all coming back to the office. And then fast forward to today, we're starting to see a little bit more kind of clarity around what that future could look like. Now, yesterday, when I was talking to you, I had no idea that BMG, human behavior firm, has been remote first this entire, at least for the last 4 years, if not more, and that you are a global remote first company, which is actually really important, because what we will soon learn is that the future of work it truly is global. So that's where we got to yesterday. And we said, let's pause and have a conversation again, gather my thoughts. So I have a lot of questions. And the first one is just to help me wrap my head around a place to start
Mhm.
is, can you talk to me a little bit about where is work? Where has it been the last 50 years in modern time? Where are we now? And then where do you see it going in the future as it relates to a lot of the work you've been doing the last few years?
Yeah, so I guess if we take this very nebulous topic of future of work and we just focus on where, um, in the past, work is a place you go to and then come back to. It's this clear delineation of what urban planning designers kind of work through, of like first place, second place, third place, where you live, where you work, where you play. And that is those clear silos of I go into an office, I go into a plant, I go into a whatever hub to do work to earn a living. And today, that's a very, very different. And one of the things that we saw really from, I mean, one could say all the way from the dot-com boom in the 90s all the way through the 2010s, is this shift of, oh, do I really have to come into the office for this one thing, or what have you? So we saw some subtle changes, time over time, and the 2010s definitely accelerated that a little bit more. When what happened in 2020 due to COVID, which was 90% of the reason why this kind of um epidemic process occurred is it really moved us 15, 20 years into the future. If nothing else had changed, that trend line would have continued probably pretty steadily.
Mhm.
But because we had to very quickly adapt, we realized, oh, wow, there's so much more. Work is not where you are, work is what you do. And it doesn't necessarily have to be location exclusive in many of those instances. Some roles are for sure, but others not so much. And in fact, it is entirely dependent upon what you do that determines which and what part of the segment of work you are in. Are you in idea? Are you in conversation? Are you in buy-in? Are you in actual execution? Or are you in assessment? That also takes a contributing factor of what is work and when is work in office, when is work remote, when is work at an offsite, all of these aspects. So I see this as a transitioning point, a kind of an awakening of sorts to say maybe work is not what we thought it was of the past. And I personally in the future see this concept of being located or being not mutually exclusive to a particular location to be productive as a future tense and kind of creating some kind of balance and more standardized processes. It's definitely going to be a blended approach. And we see that because all over the world, in 2019, Estonia was the first country to offer what's called a digital nomad visa, which sounds very hippie and like free form, like kind of wild child type of thing, but it's a legitimate visa that a country has enabled. And since then, over 60 countries have a digital nomad visa or have something equivalent to it for mostly remote and digital workers. So this is a growing trend, a very rapidly one, given the amount of countries that have adopted this model. Now, will I say it's in their benefit, especially if I have a country that's, reducing in population and they also have a larger aging population? Absolutely. You look at Japan, you look at Italy, you even look at places like in Germany. They are offering what's called a freelance visa, which is basically the equivalent of that. And those are the trends that we're seeing today in order to kind of shape what the future could look like in that aspect. So if we talk about past, present, and future, it really is this kind of transition, and we're still figuring our way out. And that's a journey on its own. And I think every company needs to go through their own journey.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing, first of all, so when we first kind of went inside in March of 2024, over the months, we started to see colleagues that were moving back maybe to their childhood home, or they were buying a Sprinter van and taking off, and in some cases, traveling the world. And whereas that was aspirational and bucket list in the past, we're now seeing our colleagues who are just relocating to other countries for a variety of reasons that are absolutely outside of the work they're doing. It's evident that there's many different lenses that we could view this through. And I think that's part of the challenge for companies is that, first of all, the current's going to have you believe all these things, and that's for a reason, because that's how B2B sells to you, to tell you what the future is going to look like. And they keep it ambiguous or tilted towards their category position. So you have to have a competent a strategy to move forward. And one of the things that we started to talk about is kind of bringing together the mental models and approaches. And this is the work you've been doing. And I'm going to ask you about some of the clients you've been working with, where it's grounded in organizational theory. So it's grounded in academia, and then you're looking through the lens, reviewing through the lens of company health, organization health, uh, pipeline, and what's the third one?
Practice.
And practice. Can you talk to me a little bit about what those three mean? And then the customer one of the customers you've been working with.
Yeah. So I'll start with actually pipeline because that's the easiest to describe. It's a talent pipeline. Am I retaining and managing current and new talent into it? And this is where my company, since its inception, has always been remote. And I did that specifically because I wanted to bring the best of the best, and that doesn't have to be local to the Chicagoland area, which at the time it's still currently my home, but that's where I was spending the vast majority of my time. And there are companies out there that actually have perfected this model on talent acquisition globally on a remote scale that can do it really, really well. So pipeline is really all about talent focus. Do I have the people in the quantity I need with the skill set that I need? Practice is, can I operationalize, standardize some of these across a globalized team? And that's really challenging when you have, and I'll use my example, 4 people in the UK, 2 people in the UAE, another person that kind of is a true digital nomad that travels a new country every quarter. So how do you standardize practices? That's another component. And then lastly, health, because and this is probably the newest thing that in the past we would have never considered, the health and well-being. And I'm not talking about our overwork or one of those. I'm talking about true psychological safety for an organization. Does someone feel comfortable enough to share their ideas or go collaborate with another department or even just bring up problems into the workplace that could enhance the environment drastically? And I think that if you've got those pretty well dialed, you have a very strong and very healthy organization that is a competitive advantage in many, many cases.
Okay. So you have, so that through these three lenses, the health practices and pipeline, what does that look like? What does the pipeline look like for you in terms of something that's become more of a standard or norm, that's validated, the type of talent that you've brought in?
So I think for every organization, it's a little bit different. We have 3 layers of basically the acquisition process for talent. And the first one is obviously getting a JD that covers some key areas around, one, what type of autonomy is this person going to have? That's really important in my organization when we have people that have very specific individual contributions and then are dependent on for group contributions or collective contributions. So we kind of lay out even our JDs around like, here's what is autonomous to you. And then we talk about authority. What are they responsible for? What kind of decisions are they capable of making on their own, or potentially in a group where they are the lead decision maker in that? And then we talk about resources. What type of resources does this person need to have? That could be skill set. That could be locations. That, let's say, for example, I need a regional specialist in something because we do a lot of globalized programs and then go through a localization program for a lot of our, especially our marketing related initiatives. So I kind of look at it in those lenses, and that's actually how we manage, review, and assess our team behavior and our team health.
Okay. How's that look? Yeah.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I'm curious, you talk about, psychological safety. It's a norm, say in some ecologies and some geographies where it's kind of a new concept in others, and in others it sounds like jargon. But this is where BMG comes in, where you're helping organizations understand or what perception is, both internally for their organization as they're planning, as well as externally when it's time to do that, and then moving them into experience. Can you talk a little bit about that? And I'm especially keen to hear about one of your client partners and how you've brought them through that process.
So I'll talk about this particular client that is in a niche industry, but faces a lot of the same tenants when a lot of the return of the office mandates have occurred. They just have greater risk because they have enhanced market share due to their talent, and by losing it, it's a much scarier thing when it comes to growth and when it comes or the lack of it in this instance. So this particular client came to us, gosh, almost 2 years ago at this point, um, and had enforced a return to the office mandate, and shortly after, they were met with a lot of resistance. And this is kind of how the phase goes. It's like there's initially a lot of resistance. Then there's questioning and trying to understand, well, like, why are we doing this? And so you get a lot of questioning. And then the group split. Either they comply and potentially with a lot of resentment to it, or they disassociate and then eventually leave. And those two areas, they had kind of actually a large influx of the latter, of disassociation and exiting. And in this particular instance, they live in an area where it was really hard to get pipeline for talent. They put in a ton of money on the university level to train people into this particular industry and then move them into leadership roles. So when they were losing those key leaders, they also lost the people under them because that was the sole purpose of working for that type of organization. It wasn't the brand equity of, I want to work for X company because I think they're amazing. It was, no, I want to work for Joe because Joe is the leader in this. And then the next company I work for could say, I work for Joe. And that's the whole environment of this organization. So when you lose 4 or 5 Joes out of the 10 that you have a very big problem in it. And that's the reason they brought us in. And it wasn't even the fact that they did anything out of practice. It was very standard in the sense of, here's return to the office mandate. They did have a much shorter grace period for converting over back into the office, but they had a very different environment. And in fact, a lot of those senior leaders ended up leaving for startups and that offered that flexibility, or smaller organizations that offer that flexibility to it, because they weren't gonna, the whole purpose was they didn't want to leave locations, so why would they go work for a company that's far away? So the startup mentality was really appealing to them, and that's who they lost their talent to. Add that to the fact that they were kind of in this big repositioning of new business that was coming in, and they needed those engineers and those senior leaders to be able to manage that book of business. And now they had nobody to do so. And I just said it takes them 5 to 10 years to get somebody at this level of expertise. So that's not like they can just buy that person out from somewhere else.
So what I'm hearing is you're talking about a population where there's a requirement that they be in office. It's the type of job, and that innovation is key here. Therefore, their human capital is a strategic asset. So from the perspective of where is work, and kind of going back to everyone's got an answer, guess what? There's lots of different ways. It's really about what's best for the organization and their strategy and their commercial objectives. So in this case, can you talk to me a little bit more about kind of fleshing that out?
Yeah, so normally we kind of went into like what were the linchpins that caused this type of environment, and that's what we talked a little bit more about. Like, walk us through how you communicated this, walk us through how you distributed this information, and then we dug a deeper dive into, well, why is there so much resistance? And a lot of it was the communication from previous quarters around, we have record profits, and then from an employee perspective to say, well, you've been having record profits, why would you need us to come back into the office? It doesn't seem to even make business sense, without realizing exactly what you just said. Human capital is an incredible asset to this company, and the collaboration and innovation that is starting to wane because they have a remote culture, because they don't know how to build one remotely, is a key component. So though our arc, so to speak, is, that inquiry both internally within the employees as well as within the leadership team, is to say, here's what's caused this, and then here's the mitigation strategy. And the first one is really talking about narrative, which is our perception program, and working through, we're going to pause, we've heard you, so we're going to pause all of these activities and reset it and co-create something that is mutually beneficial. Because the other component is, if I am someone who's been working from remotely for the last 3 years, 2 years, it would not make sense. In fact, some of their team members were hired remotely, so their contracts even said it's a remote position. So what do you do with those groups of population? And this is where we take this blended approach around. Really, if we think about the behavioral dynamics matrix around when we want people to behave at certain spaces, what activities are critical? Is it ideation and innovation? Is it people connection? Is it true activity and labor? Or is it, analysis? And say, this is really when you want your people to be in office in order to create that connected culture and foster collaboration, which drives the innovation component that you really wanted. And this is when they're individual contributors. So you really don't need them. In this instance, they really didn't need people 5 days in the office. And then we also looked at some of the logistical issues around the perception. And I like to call this a tolerant level of uncomfortability. Before COVID, you go into the office, maybe your commute sucks, what have you. After COVID, you've gotten used to, in this case, they had a large population of workers that were parents. So you've gotten used to your kid coming home at 3, them getting a snack, but you staying in your office, and now you don't have to go anywhere after 3 o'clock and pick them up or what have you. So we really worked through some of those interstitial troubles because that sensitivity of going back to something that feels a little bit antiquated already, and now it's causing me a problem from a commute standpoint or a familial and other parts of my life standpoint. Well, now I just have a very serious disinterest in doing any of that. So in our solution, we worked through the narrative and the processes and some of the incentives that we worked through from a language and aesthetic standpoint. And then we talked about the experience, which is our experience program around what do people face in the office? And part of that is even just getting to the office. I have to take my child to daycare, and then I have to come back into the office, which could be a 90-minute commute. So that's 3 hours a day. That's a really long time for a commute. And especially in this area, particularly because this company was headquartered in the Midwest. So we worked through some scenarios, and we offered the opportunity for them to have partner with a daycare that they can rent out because they already had a space on the lower floors for like larger conference rooms. And that was our first aha. That sounds like a really appealing idea. It was so appealing that the actual owners of the building, as we were talking with the manager, the property manager and the owners, they loved that idea so much they brought it up to the whole floor and offered it for all of their tenants because they individually were experiencing an occupancy issue as well. Then we looked at how are people behaving in the office? And in this case, they have very similar to the 2010s when everyone had an open office environment of not even senior executives have offices. So then what happens? Well, the senior executives now book the conference rooms because they need the privacy to, so, logistically doesn't work. So we worked through actually redesigning all of their floors to enhance the experience of when I am at work, when I'm in the office, I don't have to just sit on my desk and hear a bunch of people. So therefore I have to put earphones and then hope the person that I'm on a Zoom call hears me because we can't find a conference room. So we really created spaces of collaboration, innovation, culture building, and then just team opportunity for group contribution as well as individual contribution, as well as that privacy and components. So really addressing all of those levers was part of our instance. And I'm happy to say that now they're actually getting an even higher rate of people coming into the office because it makes their lives easier. to say, why would I not come in the office the other days of the week when I have a daycare center that I can take him, and I get to spend time with my child on the way home. So it's very much like bring your child to work day almost every day. Um, and
But only in the best ways.
but only in the best
Or-
ways, because there is a seclusion and
Yeah.
there's a space differentiator. So we've created rules and behavior triggers to make sure that, we don't want all the spaces to be for children. We wanted some to be for them and some to be for adults only, especially for those that don't have children and did not want to be part of that environment.
Yep.
So those are the things that we have to take into consideration. And frankly, they joked around. It's like now we have another pipeline of talent coming in because the children are exposed to what their parents are doing. So it was kind of a nice happy pulse check the last time we had it. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, we make light of it, but literally you could make a case study based on the last 3 minutes of what you said. There's so many little things that I don't think a regular listener would really clue into, but I hope that we can talk to you about the future. One of the big ones is the aesthetic, the environment, the activity. There's all kinds of things from a psychological perspective that your firm brings in to create these, but kind of backing way up, where is work, and should it be hybrid, remote, or in person, really isn't the question you should be asking, right? Because there's so much work not so much, there's work that you do to come in. For example, one might say, oh, well, we could figure out what people want. They all want to stay home, or, some version of that, but it's really just perception. I think that Deloitte just did some research around this epically, wildly huge gap between what the C-suite felt that the organization thought, their functional leaders, how happy they were, and then how actually not happy the functional leaders are. And in fact, all rated that they would absolutely leave for greener pastures or perceived greener pastures. So you've got one set of people that are planning based on inaccurate thinking. There's just they're destined to fail. So being able to come in and not look at data that's available in the current, or even what some consulting firm says, or what your team thinks, but actually getting in there we talked about PSTI in our last conversation, super simple framework of planning, strategy, tactics, implementation. Doesn't get more simple than that. So if you're in that planning and strategy shaping, where you're looking at your organizational strategy, to have that accurate thinking involved in the data to support what would actually work for what we need. We're not like any other company. Our human capital is strategic. They are, I don't know what the term is for, when there's a long runway before they become fully where you have their maximum value from
Capacity.
that
Yeah.
capacity. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's all these things. So planning from that perspective, therefore, it kind of probably makes sense to have an accurate and informed understanding of what's actually happening in your business, especially when it's perhaps not even located on site at the moment because of whatever's happened over the last, say, 4 years. So I think that's something that's really important to just recognize. And then as I said, it's just, I think there's so many different directions you could go in. Like once you have that data, and unlike even if we were to hire, even if we were to gather our own data that we all know how to gather as leaders, when we are planning and shaping strategy, to have this perspective that's psychological, that's based on human behavior, how people actually think and behave, I think is really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're hitting it right on the nail of this is not a silver bullet by any means. It is, and that's why in the beginning I said that the journey is just as important as where you land, because the journey helps you carve which path you're going to take. And a lot of it is going to be probably an off the beaten path approach, because we're all experiencing it all at the same time. I'm working with an entirely different client actively right now, and they've always had a turnover problem. It's just become a organizational problem because of the high cost of talent acquisition that has come to light, and potentially other competitors, like, and I say competitors in a broad sense, like AI, that has made their lives much more challenging than in the past. So they've kind of pivoted of, we're more of a tech enabled company, we're a technology first company, and now that there's actually way more technology companies in their space, they have to lean into their repositioning into a human first company. Well, they have a lot of problems in their human capital management process. So, and turnover is one of them. So there's no component, and that's why I keep using the word blended, which is different than hybrid, because hybrid is you're intentionally going through it, and you may have some people that are remote, you may have some people that are hybrid, you may have some people that are fully in office. That's what I mean by blended. It's the combination of them.
So new lexicon, new perspective, blended to manage the realities of all the decisions that we have made, tactically over the last few years around, we're going to be remote first. And so you have people that are working in various locations and they are not moving. They've invested in living in those spaces. So being able to have something that works, most important, well, not only for the business holistically, profit and commercial as well as for people.
Yeah. And I say that as, because my organization already started remote, it's much easier for me to manage remote, but I have a totally different management system and people management practice than an in-person environment was. And I think that's also a big delineation that we need to work through, is what is the effort that it takes to get somebody remote to be motivated and driven and connected to culture. It's a very different topic that we have to work through. Hence why the blended comes with different prescriptions. And even within my team, I mentioned my UK team members. They actually have a co-working space that they operate together because they want to see each other more often. They're geographically in a similar area, and I think as humans we inherently still want to connect. Just depends on how we decide to. And then to be entirely transparent, that wasn't my idea. That came out of a 2019 debrief call that we all had together, and then COVID hit, so that kind of threw it in the rut. But it kind of came back afterward. So you would be surprised what team members come up with, once you have that level of psychological safety, and how much more connected they are to your organization and how much more loyal they would be to your organization for being able to offer that kind of environment, as opposed to others that say we're remote only and there's no place for you to engage and focus, or the opposite of you have to have your the rudimentary term of butts in seats every day in and out kind of thing. And that's why the blended is so important, is you offer the opportunity for an optimized environment that gives people that autonomy and authority and the resources that they need to be successful.
Yeah, I think we're seeing another conversation coming to surface. Sort of what is work? And I think we're seeing sort of there are several maybe mental models and approaches that we're seeing kind of come into view in order to have an informed and validated path forward. It's not just about making that indecision of which of those it'll be.
Yeah, and I think that in many cases you almost want to answer that question before you answer where is work. Because if where is work is a blended, unique environment, well, you need to figure out what is work to
Okay.
give you the prescription. Because if your work is, you know, highly digitalized, you have, everything from VR capabilities to create a digital reality all the way through, Maybe your work is, much more creative versus having, a manufacturing plant where processes and systems are that much more crucial to that organization's health and delivery of to their customers. So this is the balance that we have to take for it. So yeah, let's make that our next topic of now that we've covered where is work, we can cover what is work in this series.
Makes sense to me. Sounds good. Thanks for
Awesome.
the conversation, Ellza.
All right. Yep, definitely. Thanks everyone for listening. We will talk to you soon.